Thanks, Chair. Look, I think I appreciate this workshopping, and maybe we should be patient with each other to establish a common understanding of the judgment. We must not falter our interpretation. So we have to be very clear that we have appreciated fully what the judgment is. Now, the confusion, and I mean, this is a thing with judgments like this, is that they are serious judges or justices that give very powerful, counter arguments and so on and so forth. But the majority judgment holds the dictates. That's the first point of departure, the majority judgment. Yes, we can appreciate the counter-argument of the Chief Justice and its brilliance, but in relation to taking our key, how do we implement the majority judgment? And that's the first thing that's important here. And therefore, it seems to me that the bridge of the separation of powers comes precisely in a value judgment on the establishment of seriousness. So a court, if it is sensitive, in my view, not to remove a president directly, it will not add the word serious violation. That is where it is giving us a bridge. What the inquiry therefore does, which I think the two examples that the Honorable Steenhuisen gives are very crucial. We're making rules for the future, but we have a delinquent as well in question, who has been properly ruled to have violated the Constitution by the highest court in the land. But what didn't happen is that nobody has heard his side of the story. Nobody has heard his response, oral evidence, and it comes out in the judgment. We don't know, and if we are to establish seriousness, we need to all hear, did this guy have the intention to undermine the public protector's work in the investigation in Nkandla? Or as he said in his apology, he was just ill-advised or he did not understand the law. We have to be able to attach intention and say, no, you have intentionally undermined and therefore it's a serious violation. So we must establish that factually, that there is a serious violation. The second part is, what do the members of parliament vote on? So, and in my view, and you'll see why we think later on what we will propose is that that factual finding mission or factual finding process must be as much as possible conducted by legal experts, because it's a fact-finding mission. This happened, he has the right to present, to hear his side of the story. Like in a company, the company, if the CEO has done something wrong, they get somebody from outside, some senior counsel, to do a report and recommend. So you could have been found guilty and there are sanctions to the guilt. Sanctions, the removal from office, or take your salary for 12 months and so on and so forth. But the board still needs to decide, because the CEO cannot be removed by somebody who is outside the company, who is not a member of the company. That's a fact-finding mission. And a Section 89, according to the judgment, needs an inquiry before a debate can happen, which establishes for us the facts. Now, that, I think, the first two violations are different to the third. For an example, as the Honorable Mulder says, if a person is too old, and maybe he is not aware that he's old, he sleeps in parliament, he cannot lift up a pen, we must agree that this person must be removed from presidency. Or he's suffered a stroke, like one of the presidents of apartheid, and is still in denial that he cannot perform. Members of parliament must save the country because it's going to take dangerous decisions. Or there is a psychiatric report that this guy or this lady has gone mad, or has suffered some psychological, he can no longer be rational, and so on and so forth. That's why, on the last why, I think you can't take all the benefits, because it's capacity, as it were. So that would be my my interpretation, or it's not even an interpretation, it's very clear in the majority judgment. That's what we are called to do. Even if there would be a court judgment, I remember in the interrogation what the Chief Justice was struggling with is, he says, for instance, okay, if we find that the president has indeed committed murder and then we do not take him to prison, don't you think that's a serious violation? I may think so, but Parliament must still go subject itself as long as you don't send him to prison. If you don't send him to prison, you are saying Parliament must go see it because you have said it's a sanction cause. For if you thought it was serious, why didn't you send him to prison? So for as long as they don't send the president to prison, we have to have our own satisfactory inquiry as a separate arm of the state. That is at least what my interpretation is. Thank you. Chair. Two things quickly, which I think are very clear in the majority judgment. So I'm going to read it. What Justice Chapter does is to mention Section 89. And this is an important point we must be absolutely and crystally clear about. This provision empowers the Assembly, and the Assembly alone, to remove the President from office. He quotes Section 89, and he says, this provision empowers the Assembly, and the Assembly alone, to remove the President from office. The drafters of the Constitution were alive to the fact that the need to remove a sitting President from office may arise. Hence, this section allocates that power to the Assembly, presumably because it's the Assembly that elects the President. It is only fitting that the same body should have the power to remove the person elected from office. Then he says, the impeachment process, for the impeachment process to commence, the Assembly must have determined that one of the listed grounds exists. This is so because grounds constitute conditions for the President's removal. A removal of the President where none of these grounds is established would not be a removal contemplated in this section. Equally, a process for removal of the President where none of those grounds exist would amount to a process not authorized by the section. I will jump, so I'm reading from 173 of the judgment downward. These are important pages to establish where the power lies. So I want to answer some questions which we must be brave to admit. We must not think we can if the, okay, I'll get back to that just now. So another important line perhaps to state here is that since the power to remove is institutional, the Assembly must decide and facilitate the initiation of the preliminary stage. It may very well be that each member of the Assembly has the right to initiate the process. So that has to do with the process. I want to speak to this question of seriousness because it's addressed as well here. In their words, in the words of the majority judgment. 170. Yes, 77. Okay, let's start 76. The power to remove the President from office is available to the Assembly only if one of the listed grounds available. I've already read that. It is evident that the drafters left the details relating to the grounds to the Assembly to spell out, but the drafters could have not contemplated that members of the Assembly would individually have to determine what constitutes a serious violation of the law or the Constitution or conduct on the part of the President, which in the first place amounts to misconduct, and whether in the second place such conduct may be characterized as serious misconduct. If this were to be the opposition, then we would end up with divergent views on what is serious violation of the Constitution or the law and what amounts to serious misconduct envisaged in this section. And since the determination of these grounds falls within the exclusive jurisdiction of the Assembly, it and it alone is entitled to determine them. This means that there must be an institutional predetermination of what a serious violation of the Constitution or the law is. The same must apply to serious misconduct and inability to perform functions of the office. Let's leave the speaker. Once more, it is left to the Assembly to determine circumstances under which the President removed from office on one of these grounds may forbid benefits. And then finally, honorable members, for the impeachment process to commence, the Assembly must determine that one of the listed grounds is established or exists. Now, so we have no option but to have our process. Even if there might be someone else out there who has a process, we are suspended. But we have to take the responsibility to have our own process. And according to this interpretation of the Constitution, or at least according to Section 89, whether we are second-guessing someone or not is no longer relevant. We must have our process. So you may as well say there's a court ruling. On the basis of the court ruling only, you can't remove the president on the basis of Section 89. You may on the basis of the motion of no confidence, but not on the basis of Section 89. So if there's a serious violation by the Constitution and we evoke Section 89, the Parliament is obliged to put that into a process. And part of the evidence that will be presented is precisely the court judgment. That here is the judgment, the president can also lead his legal evidence, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to clear that. The second point I want to clear is this minority what. In this institutional predetermination is not majorities and minorities and what. And the judgment is clear. One, it says on 194, Chapter is dealing with this question of the ad hoc committee, including committees of parliament. In fact, if you read these sections from 194, 95, 96, he's outlawing. He says the committee process is not what is contemplated. The ad hoc committee process is not what is contemplated, and he gives reasons why. Because you can't arrive at facts by voting. You can arrive at what must be the punishment by voting. But the determination of facts doesn't need. We can't all of us agree by a majority that this is blue when it is red. Then we are not fit to be in this house, basically. Facts must be established. So Parliament must have its process. That's our first responsibility, is to establish how that process is going to be. And it cannot be on the basis of the committees that exist in our rules, including the ad hoc committee. Now, the reason why I was disagreeing, and I thought Advocate Jafta will correct this, when he was reading the summary, Jenkins, sorry, Jafta is the justice. What he read as the principles is the summary of the Chief Justice in a minority judgment. He is summarizing what he thinks are the principles on the basis of what Justice Jafta's judgment says. No, that's not what we need to. We can. That's what we have a space here to say what must be, and this is why there is no compromise or there is no textbook violation of separation of powers. What he's doing there by interpreting it that way is that he's trying to ground a wrong interpretation of the majority judgment. The majority judgment is not prescribing. It doesn't have prescriptions of this is how what the rule must say and it must follow. So we may as well come back to the initial conversation of having, that's why I was making an example about companies. But if you think companies are minority, as minority bodies in the society, the Judicial Service Commission, how does it impeach judges? And that could be the framework which we use. South Africa has already answered the question of impeachment. It's just it did in a different regime of the state. So we could look at the Judicial Service Commission Act and how judges are impeached. But the perfect example is precisely what we've been recommending when we were starting, that because he's the president, even here they say he's no longer a member of the House, he only lives by the rules when he's in the House. He's in the different arm of the state. Let's get retired judges that will establish for us the facts, bring the report to Parliament, and then we vote or we debate. But on the basis, firstly, that there must be a predetermination. That predetermination doesn't have to be by members of Parliament themselves. And those examples are there in other countries, in the report of other countries that we looked at. I'm just saying we have that option. It has not been taken from us. It has, if it was taken from us, it would have been a textbook case of judicial overreach. But the judges didn't do that. So we still have that option. Finally, Chairperson, I want to appreciate that there is obviously, and this is the practicality of people who have been in Parliament for a while. There's how do you process the motion? I think that's where the Speaker doesn't have to decide if it's serious or not. So nobody must decide a priori, because that's what the process must determine. So if you are a member, an ordinary member, and you believe that there must be an impeachment, you draft a motion that there must be an impeachment, that there must be a process of impeachment, and you tell the Speaker that there is 1 and 2 and 3. The Speaker then subjects the process to the House. The House votes, and we're not voting on a new committee or what. It must not be decided on an ad hoc basis. Then the people who process that call the president and do all of that important work of establishing the facts must always, in my view, be there and be determined at the beginning of every parliament. The 5th Democratic Parliament, the 6th Democratic, like that. And it could be 4 or 5 judges. Depending on which one will be available, we get that one to do the process of impeachment. And then I agree, the president must have legal representation. The president must, and that body must have the powers of subpoena. If it doesn't have the powers of subpoena, it won't be effective. But the president must have legal representation. There must be an evidence leader or indictment and all those things. It must be a proper trial. And in my view, that's what that section, that's the best way to do it without compromising majorities and what Honorable Nyami Boy was saying. If I'm chairing that committee, a sitting president who is most likely, as the judgment says, who is most likely to be the party leader of the majority party in the House, may not feel that they must answer to, particularly on things that are going to impact on their removal. So to give them a fair trial, we just step aside and watch. But it is one that is owned by ourselves, is commissioned by our resolutions, and reports to us. And we take the final decision of whether we remove him or her. Thank you.